Math is racist. At least that's what someone in Oregon seems to think, because they created this 82-page pamphlet that was distributed to math educators, talking about how they need to dismantle racism in mathematics education. The goal is to achieve something called math equity, and they believe for some reason that white supremacy runs rampant in mathematics. And they say that we see white supremacy culture show up in mathematics classroom in lots of different ways, including focusing on getting the right answer, that's being racist, participation is also racist, and addressing mistakes is also racist. And I wish they were joking about this, but they're not. So let's start off with what I think is the most ridiculous example. And that is that white supremacy culture shows up in the math classrooms when the focus is on getting the quote, right answer. They say the concept of mathematics being purely objective is unequivocally false, upholding the idea that there are always right and wrong answers perpetuates objectivity as well as fear of open conflict. So they're essentially saying that you shouldn't teach math if there's only one right answer and if other answers are wrong. That's perpetuating some sort of white supremacist culture, which makes no sense to me. 1 + 1 is equal to 2. I hope you know that that is the right answer. There are right answers in math. There are wrong answers in math. That's one of the reasons that I actually really liked math as opposed to something like English. This is absurd. Getting the right answer is not white supremacist, or expecting someone to get the right answer is not in any way racist. This makes no sense. But we don't stop there. They also believe that white supremacy shows up when we address mistakes in the classroom. They say that teachers often treat mistakes as problems by equating them with wrongness, rather than treating them as opportunities for learning. Which I agree we should do. You shouldn't point out that something's wrong to humiliate the student in any way. You should use that as a learning opportunity and find out why it was wrong. But this is where they lose me. They say it also perpetuates perfectionism and paternalism, which in their beliefs is the idea that teachers or other experts can and should correct mistakes. And they view that as a negative for some reason. You are a teacher. Your responsibility is to teach the students. If they make a mistake, it's great if the student recognizes that and fix it on their own. But if they don't, it is your responsibility to let them know that it was a mistake and to help them fix it. That's common sense. You can't just let the student go on thinking they did it right if they did it completely wrong. Correcting mistakes is a good thing. Students make mistakes, and that's okay. Correcting it is part of a classroom. But they also believe, for some reason, that showing your work in a math class is racist. They say that math teachers ask students to show work so that teachers know what students are thinking. Well, yeah, but that centers the teacher's need to understand rather than student learning. And so it also perpetuates the ideas of worship of the written word and paternalism. Okay, I am a physics graduate student right now, and I have been a TA in physics at a university for a number of years. So I've taught college classes for a number of years. Showing your work is a very crucial part in physics or in math. You can't really know what you're doing very well unless you show your work. So there are a number of reasons why students should show their work and why teachers require it. One, to make sure you're on the right track. If you have no idea what you're doing and you don't show your work, your teacher doesn't know how to help you. They don't know where to correct you or where to give you guidance. So it is certainly beneficial to the student. It also helps you process what you need to do and work through problems. But there's also the thing that it helps as teachers know if you actually did the problem correctly. Let's say you write down the right answer, but you show no work. The teacher doesn't know if you actually just jumped to the answer, or maybe you looked over to your friend, saw they had the answer, and wrote that down and cheated. Showing your work is pretty crucial when it comes to math and physics. And these people obviously have no idea how to go about this because they're saying that showing your work is a bad thing, that requiring students to show their work is somehow racist. And that's insane. It really is. I don't know who these people are or where they came up with this stuff, but it's nonsense. And we're going to see as we go on that the real racism here is not the things they're alleging that teachers do. It's actually people who come up with this nonsense in the first place. They are saying in a very low-key way that these things are racist because you can't expect minority students to perform in the same way as white students. That expecting minority students to apparently show their work or get the right answer or be corrected, all of that is just racist. And so we shouldn't expect it of them. That is a bigotry of low expectations if I've ever seen it. It's horrendous that things like this are being perpetuated as ways to try and help solve racism, but they're actually making it worse. Instead of setting the bar so low that we say you shouldn't have to get the right answer, we shouldn't correct mistakes, you shouldn't show your work, let's keep the bar where it is and help students reach it. this is insane. But they don't stop there. But before we see the rest, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can always get information like this, where we talk about some of the most ridiculous things that you can imagine in society today. Let's continue because, as I said, there's 82 pages of this. We're not going to look at all of them, but I want to highlight some of the more ridiculous ones as we keep going. They also say that if you believe that teachers are teachers and students are learners, that is also white supremacy, which I don't understand. It says unique to mathematics is the idea that new learning comes from the teacher. I thought that's what classes were for the most part. The idea is often that teachers provide the learning and are in charge of disseminating new information. And this apparently perpetuates paternalism again and power hoarding, and teachers get defensive and all this nonsense. Teachers are teachers. That's their job description. It's literally the name of their profession. They're teachers. And students are learners. That's what they're there to do. You're in school to learn. This is kind of obvious to me, but I guess that's just because I perpetuate white supremacy. If we have superficial curriculum changes to try and address racism, that is also being racist. So it gives some examples of this, talking about if you use a more minority or ethnic name in a word problem, that's just making things worse, I suppose. And they have some ways that we can fix this, and keep in mind, we're in a math classroom. So they suggest that, for instance, you could ask your students what are some of the family traditions that they're proud of, and then try and bring those into the classroom. And I don't know about you, but I don't really have any math family traditions. Maybe my family's just weird, but that doesn't seem like a thing most families have. And then they give another example that I think would be racist based on their own definitions, but I guess it's okay. So they suggest that one thing you can do as a teacher is to use Ankara fabric to help teach math concepts like fractions and percentages and things like that. If you're not familiar with these fabrics, you've probably seen them around, and they come from Africa. So I was under the impression that taking something from another culture and trying to use it in your own culture was cultural appropriation. If I were a white teacher and I took this into the classroom to teach about it, do you really think for 1 second I wouldn't be accused of cultural appropriation? Of course I would. They continue and say that teaching math the way that you learned it as a teacher is also white supremacist, because the way that mathematics is taught in the United States needs to be interrogated, because it currently centers Western, Eurocentric ways of processing and knowing information. How horrible. When students are required to learn in this way, they either have to unlearn their learned native traditions to meet teacher expectations, or they are deprived of learning math in their ancestral history. Now, there's a lot to that last sentence that I want to unpack here. The first part is that apparently teaching math in one way is going to cause students to have to unlearn their learned native traditions. I don't understand what they're talking about here. Let's say that you're an elementary school student and you're just starting to go to elementary school, you're in 1st and 2nd grade, something like that. How much math have you really learned outside the classroom up to this point? What sort of native traditions surrounding math, specifically math, do you have up to this point in your life? I can't imagine that it's very many, or much at all, for that matter. And then they say that those students are also deprived of learning math in their ancestral history. Whatever that means. We're also being racist when math is taught in a linear fashion, and skills are taught sequentially. And I understand that not all math has to be completely linear, and that makes sense. They give the examples of matrices and how you don't really need to hold off on matrices till you're about to get to calculus because you can use them with arithmetic, and that's certainly true. But I don't see why this is an example of white supremacy. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Most math is linear. You need to learn how to do arithmetic and algebra before you can get to pre-calc or calculus. It just makes sense that for the most part, math is taught in a straight line because that just kind of makes sense. So I don't know what their gripe is here. It doesn't make any sense. So we're getting to the end here. I just want to highlight a few really quick before we finish off. So it's also being racist if students are tracked. And that means you decide what courses and pathways they take in a classroom, and that if you identify which ones are more capable and you give them, I guess, more rigorous assignments, that's being white supremacist. It's also white supremacist if you abide by state standards and guidelines, which I think state standards are stupid because they haven't been working really ever, but at the same time, I don't think they're racist. It's also racist if you as a teacher are upset when your expectations are not met, because in their opinion, this thinking creates meritocracy in the classroom, where students have to pull themselves up by the bootstraps and they think it's their fault if they fail. It does not give room for the systemic reasons students fail, which often lie in problematic expectation. And I love whenever people like this talk about meritocracy as if it's this horrible thing that's the root of all evil, and it's really not. Meritocracy is fine. It's just saying that some people are more skilled in some areas and other people are skilled in other areas. And that's just called life. That's fine. It's not saying you have to do it all on your own, but it is recognizing it at the end of the day. If you fail, you should at least take some responsibility for that as a student. If you don't do your assignment, you can't just say, oh, it's because of racism. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Take some responsibility, own up, and do it better next time. To highlight an example of how ridiculous this is, let's look at San Diego, where they decided to change their grading system to, quote, combat racism. And there were a number of things they did, including make it so students are no longer graded based on a yearly average or how they turn in late assignments. So in San Diego, apparently, turning in late assignments is just racism. Systemic racism made minority students either not turn in assignments at all or turn in late assignments. And so we should just get rid of that expectation entirely. According to people like this, we can't expect minority students to be able to turn in assignments on time, or to get good grades, or to participate, or to even get the right answer. All of those things are just examples of white supremacy. Which is insane, because if you say it like that, it's obviously low expectations, which I talked about, the bigotry of low expectations. That's exactly what this is, but they're making it as if it's some way to combat racism, which it isn't. Just a few more things back to this pamphlet really quickly. Also, if we value independent practice over teamwork, that's being racist. And obviously, teamwork is important, and collaboration is very beneficial. But there's also a place for individual work, because you kind of need to know how to do things on your own. If you're always working in a team, you know what I'm talking about. There's always that one guy in the team who's so smart, and everyone just kind of piggybacks off of what they do. And because of that, you don't learn nearly as much. So individual work is very important. But they say that it reinforces the idea of individualism, which in their mind means that you're the only one. But that's not what individualism means at all. Individualism is a good thing. As a matter of fact, the definition here on the internet says that individualism is the habit or principle of being independent and self-reliant. So are we going to say that being independent and self-reliant is a negative thing? We don't want our students to be individuals. We want them to just think of themselves as a collective. So, individualism is not important. Let's not allow that to be perpetuated. Now, those are all of the examples I wanted to look at, but the main goal that they have is that we need to identify what it means to be an anti-racist math educator, which is a phrase that I never thought I would hear in my lifetime because it makes no sense. And then they quote Ibram Kendi down at the bottom, where he says that the only way to undo racism is to consistently identify and describe it, and then dismantle it. And this guy, Ibram Kendi, who they seem to be using as a thought leader, is the same guy who suggested that we have a Department of Anti-Racism in the federal government that would be responsible for pre-clearing all local, state, and federal public policies to ensure they won't yield racial inequality. So they are going to be in charge of everything that the federal government or state government or local communities, anything that is ever being put forward, would have to go through this Department of Anti-Racism first. So they are the most powerful department in the history of the United States. And they're going to have the power and disciplinary tools to wield over and against policymakers and public officials who do not voluntarily change their racist policies and ideas. If the ideas of policymakers don't align with the Department of Anti-Racism, well, then they must be ousted. So it's literally the thought police. And the Oregon school system is using this guy as an example of what we should teach in their schools? That's not going to happen. That's insane. Do you remember a little while ago when Donald Trump said that critical race theory shouldn't be taught in schools or public institutions? And there was a lot of backlash because people were saying that he was just being racist and he didn't want to learn about, Black history and all of that nonsense. Do you remember that? Well, this is what happens when you allow critical race theory to be taught in schools. You come up with this nonsensical idea that mathematics perpetuates a white supremacist culture. And it is nonsense. In no way is any of this accurate. One last time. I am someone who has taught physics for a number of years, and physics and math kind of go hand in hand. If I were to abide by some of the things they bring up here, my students would learn literally nothing. If I don't expect them to get the right answer, or if I don't expect them to show their work, then what's the point of even teaching physics? There wouldn't be any point. If you want your student to learn about math when they go to their math class, as opposed to learning about equity, as Ibram Kendi defines it, then make sure you're aware what they're actually being taught. Because this is becoming too widespread. And it's disturbing, and we're going to have a bunch of students who graduate apparently not knowing how to get the right answer when it comes to math. Anyway, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe, leave a like, and a comment, and I'll see you next time.